Today's class is dedicated in the merit of Harav Reb Shmuel ben Sarah Perel for a refuah shlema, refuah kroiva, a complete and speedy recovery, la'arichas yamim v'shanim tovos, with abundant health, happiness, prosperity, b'tov ha'nira v'ha'negla, much nachas ruach, and all the challenges should be transformed into blessings and enjoy with his Rebbetzin. Many, many happy, healthy years with abundance, bracha v'atzlacha, b'tov ha'nira v'ha'negla, ad b'li dai. Amen ken yehi ratzon. In the previous class, Monday, we began the Maamar, the Chassidic discourse by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, V'yitin Lecha ha'elikim, that was said on Shabbos Toldos, Tovshin Chav Ches, which would be the end of 1967. And it focused on the opening of the blessings of Yitzchak to Yaakov. Yitzchak thought he was Eisav. V'yitin Lecha ha'elikim, Hashem should give you from the fat of the heavens and from the dew of the heavens and the fat of the earth. The question that was raised is that generally the bracha's blessings come from the name Yudke Vavke, which is the name of compassion and generosity, as we see in the priestly blessings, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, etc. All three verses of the priestly blessings mention Hashem's name as Yudke Vavke. When it comes to these blessings, though, it says, V'yiten lecha ha'elikim. Elikim should give you, and elikim is midas hadin. Elikim is the attribute of judgment. It would seem that blessings relate more to the other name of Hashem, Yudke Vavke. This question is also about the first blessing that Yitzchak receives, not just the blessing that he gives, the blessing that he receives after the passing of his father Avram. It says, Vayivarech elikim es Yitzchak b'nai. Elikim blessed Yitzchak his son. All the blessings of Hashem to his father Avram, the name Yudke Vavke is mentioned. For example, Avram Zaken Baba Yamim, V'Hashem Bereches Avram Bakal, not Elikim. And the same is true with all the other blessings to Avram, and Lecha Vayera and Chayesara. But the first blessing that Yitzchak receives after the passing of Avram, the language the Torah uses, the phraseology is Vayivarech Elikim es Yitzchak b'nai. The main point that was explained, and I'm not going to repeat the explanation because it was lengthy, just the key point, based on a Maamar of the Baal HaTanya, Rosh Hashanah, where he explains that Gevura is not like many people think. Gevura is detachment, like, I don't have time for you, I don't have space for you, I create boundaries in which I somewhat disconnect from you. Chesed is all about love, and Gevura is about withdrawal, discipline, sternness, judgment, severity, strength. The truth is that Gevura is even a deeper form of attachment. It's even a deeper form of attachment than Chesed. And it's because I care so much, it's because I'm so in tune with you and your needs, therefore I create a structure that will serve you well. And this is a very powerful idea, that real structures, real discipline is not about carelessness, it's about caring more. Chesed, sometimes I overlook flaws. I want to give. Gevura is actually tuning in to what you need, what will serve you most, and therefore filtering my flow in a way that actually suits you. Chesed is, you just open the flow and it goes and it goes. Maybe it's good for the person, maybe it's not good for the person. Gevura actually requires much more concentration, much more attentive, tuning into the other person's needs. That's the essence of holy discipline. Holy discipline is not about, I'm in a strict mood now. I don't have time for you, I don't have space for you. On the contrary. And therefore, the hashpah, the flow that comes from Gevura, is actually much more intense. For that very reason, there is discipline, there are boundaries. As I explained in the previous class, Masachi Yekavucha, Masachi Rechakucha. And therefore, the primary blessings in Torah you see come from Yitzchak, who the Zohar associates with the level of Gevura. And that's the meaning. It says, after Avram's death, Elikim blessed Yitzchak. In the time of Avram, the quality that shined in the world was Chesed, because Avram was the tzaddik of the generation. After his death, when the new type of energy that was primarily manifested was the energy of Gevura, so now the blessings come from Elikim, which is Midas HaGevura, which is even deeper and higher blessings. And that's why Yitzchak blesses Yaakov with the words V'yitin Lecha ha'elikim. But in chapter 3 he added that the blessings V'yitin Lecha ha'elikim are even greater than the blessing of Elikim blessing Yitzchak, because that blessing goes automatically to Yitzchak and both of his children, Yaakov and Eisav, which is the reason that Avram didn't want to give that blessing. And Hashem had to come and bless him. The blessing, V'yitin Lecha Halikim, is not something that would go on its own to both children. That means it's even a greater blessing and a deeper blessing, which is why Yaakov worked very hard and he did things uncharacteristic of his nature in order to receive these blessings, even though there was already the blessing that he receives because Hashem blessed his father Yitzchak, and that blessing flows to the children, as we explained, Rashi says over there, because there's something even deeper about V'yitin Lecha Halikim. Now begins the actual explanation of all of this, and we're holding chapter 4, If Dalad or Ois Dalad in this Maamar. If you're in your source sheets, you open your source sheets, it's page Shin Mem in the source sheet. Dalad, the middle of the page. All of this will be understood and explained by introducing first the Maamar of the Alter Rebbe in the Sefer Torah Oir. Everybody knows that the Baal HaTanya B'Shnei Zalman of Liyadi, his main Svarim on Chumash are Torah Oir and Lekutei Torah. Torah is Bereishis Shmois, Lekutei Torah is Vayikra Bamidbar Dvarim and Shir Hashirim. And this Maamar now is going to take us on a journey to excavate and explore a central idea of the Alter Rebbe in this week's Torah Oir and Parshas Toldos, the famous Maamar Re'ei Reach B'ni Kereach Sada Sheberache Hashem. When Yitzchak smells, he snuffs the aroma of Yaakov who comes in with the food, he says, the aroma of my son is like the aroma, like the smell of the field blessed by Hashem. This is the Maamar in Torah Oir Parshas Toldos. We actually learned it a few years ago, this Maamar Re'ei Reach B'ni. The Alter Rebbe asks the famous question of how Yitzchak really saw Eisav, as we'll see in a moment. And really, to understand everything that we're going to be learning now, and anyway, regardless, it's a very good idea to review that Maamar because it's extremely fundamental in understanding the whole perspective of who Eisav is and who Yaakov is and what Yitzchak thought and what Rivka thought. Here he's going to give a brief, he's going to explore one brief point of that Maamar. But that Maamar you could learn, we have it also on the website on the yeshiva.net. If you go to Torah, and in Torah there's Torah Oir, and in Torah there's Toldos, you'll see the Maamar over there. There's a few classes. So if Yuvan Zabak the Mamavur B'Torah Parsha Seinu B'Kama Drushim, this will be understood by prefacing what is explained in Torah Oir, in our Parsha Toldos, and in other Maamarim, in other Drushim, other expositions. The Zeh Sheratza Yitzchak Levarach Eisav. Av Sheyada Shein Shem Shemayim Shagar B'Fiv. Ki Yitzchak Rasha B'Eisav Yesh Nitzutzas the Kedusha Gvayim Ma'oid V'Lachein Ratza Levarchai L'Ham Shechalav Oir Elin Shaydezi Yizbaru HaNitzutzas Shabbai. The question is, why did Yitzchak so eagerly want to bless Eisav? So the common explanation that most teachers will explain to the children learning the story for the first time is that Yitzchak was deceived. In other words, Eisav feigned, he acted well, he camouflaged himself as a great, holy, righteous person. And therefore Yitzchak was, so to speak, deceived into thinking that Eisav deserves these great, lofty spiritual blessings. But there's a major problem with this thesis, and the Alter Rebbe points it out in that Maamar. What is it? When Yaakov comes with the food, and Yitzchak says, how did you do it so fast? And Yaakov explains that Hashem has helped him do it. So Yitzchak says, there's something strange. This doesn't sound like Eisav. And later he says, Hakol Kol Yaakov. It's the voice of Yaakov. And Rashi explains, because Yitzchak knew that Eisav does not mention Hashem's name. Or at least not commonly. Shem Shamayim is not common in his mouth. This is what Rashi himself says about Yitzchak, that he knew there's something strange. Eisav is not mentioning God's name. So if somebody is mentioning God's name, it doesn't sound like Eisav. Now, when you know that a certain child doesn't mention Hashem's name, that means Yitzchak knew exactly who Eisav was. If Eisav is such a big tzaddik and he never mentions Hashem's name, that's strange. So we have here a paradox. On one hand, he feels so great about Eisav. On the other hand, he clearly knows that Yaakov is on a completely different level. Yaakov mentions Hashem's name and Eisav not. Now, you might say that when Rashi says, Ein Shem Shamayim Shagar B'Fiv, which is Rashi chapter 27, verse 21, he means it's not common in his mouth. He may mention it once a day, twice a day, and this not frequently. Yaakov mentions it frequently. But take a look in footnote 14. In the Medrash Rabbah it says, Shein Eisav masker shmoish lakadosh baruch hu. What Yitzchak said is, I know Eisav never mentions Hashem's name. Loima shekenu gam hakavana bepirish Rashi sham. Ki beim noimer shekavanas Rashi rak shein shem shemayim sugar befiv. Aval lepamim hu maskiroi. Zeh shamar pa machas kikra Hashem lekecha loyhaya matel sofik etzel Yitzchakim ze Eisav. Interesting. This must be also the meaning in Rashi that Eisav never mentions Hashem's name. Because if Rashi means that Eisav mentions Hashem's name, but just infrequently, then the fact that Eisav said once, Hashem helped me bring this food, would not prove that he's not Eisav. If Eisav never mentions Hashem's name, even one mention of God already creates this doubt in Yitzchak's mind. Who is this? Is this Eisav or not? But if Eisav sometimes, albeit infrequently, does mention Hashem's name, so why was Yitzchak confused from Eisav mentioning Hashem's name just once? So from here we understand when the Rashi says, Ein Shem Shemayim Shagah B'Fiv, it means that Eisav never mentions Hashem's name. So the question now is, if Yitzchak understood this about Eisav, so he knew who Eisav was. In fact, the pasuk clearly says that Eisav married, and his wives were a source of terrible aggravation for Yitzchak and Rivka. So did Yitzchak really think that Eisav married women who are completely opposite of him? Completely opposite of him, as Rashi says, they would fill the home with idolatry and the aroma of pagan idolatry, and Yitzchak was terribly aggravated from it. So obviously Yitzchak saw and he understood. He wasn't naive and he was not deceived, Chalila, by Eisav. So the Alter Rebbe explains that Yitzchak understood there's two elements to Eisav. Eisav himself needed moral help, but Eisav had very profound divine energy inside of him, trapped. And he wanted to bless him, not just to squander a blessing. He wanted to confer on Eisav, on Oir Elyon. Oir Elyon is a great light, a great love, and a great energy that will inspire the dormant sparks that are embedded in him. Sounds like a great idea. So why did Rivka disagree? Ella, continues the Rebbe, Shebe'im haya nimshech Eisav Eisav shelo yayidei Yaakov haya be'echad b'shnei ponim. Oisha haya nivla boy, Oisha haisam is batelas mitziyusay. V'bechdei sheyi abirur deisa v'adei Yaakov dafka. However, if this light that Yitzchak wanted to draw down on Eisav to trigger and awaken and resurrect, so to speak, the inner sparks in him, if it would have been communicated to Eisav not through Yaakov, one of two things would have happened. Either this tremendous energy would be swallowed up in Eisav and therefore squandered, or if it wouldn't be swallowed up, it would obliterate him because it was too intense. In order to sublimate Eisav and ultimately bring out his sparks, it has to be a process that Eisav can integrate without overwhelming him and without the energy becoming swallowed up and destroyed inside of him. And this has to happen throughout history through Yaakov. V'lachein sivev HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheYitzchak yivarech es Yaakov. V'hamshachas oiris al yoinim tal hashamayim mishman yoris tia liYaakov she'idei ze yivareres hanetzutzos shebe'Eisav. Therefore Hashem allowed this and orchestrated this in a way that Yitzchak should give the blessings to Yaakov. He wants to give them to Eisav. They go to Eisav. Because they'd go to Eisav. But he gave these tremendous lights, which is intimated through these words, the dew of heaven and the fat of the land. It's not just the physical dew and the physical fat. It represents, these are metaphors, like everything in Torah. It's an allegory also for tremendous spiritual, intense, divine lights to go to Yaakov, through which he will be able to ultimately elevate and bring to the fore and arouse the lofty, extraordinary divine sparks in Asaf. The Chevra Taifas, you understand what he's saying? Give an example. Yitzchak sees there's something very special in Asaf. The problem is Eisav himself doesn't see it. Eisav himself is not so aware of it. These are tremendous sparks that are lofty, but they're trapped. And therefore they're dormant. So Yitzchak is not naive. He knows exactly who Eisav is. And that's why he could say Eisav doesn't mention Hashem's name. But within Eisav, there is deep light, there's deep potential, there's deep energy that he himself is not conscious of. And Yitzchak can see it clearly, and Yitzchak wants to bless him in order to bring out those nitzutzes, those sparks. And Yitzchak is right, and that's why the Torah gives us the story of Yitzchak and his perspective, not to tell us he was wrong, to tell us that he was right. If he was right, how could Rivka be right? Yitzchak was right and Rivka was right. Yitzchak is speaking about the truth. He is describing the ideal situation. You don't give up on Asaf because there are nitzutzes there. There's deep sparks there. In reality, Rivka was the master of execution, of implementation. Yitzchak represents the dream, and Rivka represents how we're going to implement that dream. How are we going to implement that dream? The blessings have to go through Yaakov. And through Yaakov, they're going to be transmitted to Asaf. Why? Because if this light would directly be communicated to Asaf, not through Yaakov, one of two things can happen. Either Asaf will absorb the light but swallow it up, and it will be squandered and scattered. An example for that would be, I don't know if it's a perfect example, it's probably not, but it just comes to mind. Sometimes you see somebody who's in addiction, and you really want to help them. So you give them a handsome amount of money, and you say, here, go. This is money to go to a rehab center. Go into rehab and get your life together. Now, the addict may have a part that's really drawn to that, but what is he going to do with the money? Anybody knows? What happens often? He may just take your money and spend it on buying more destructive substances or engaging in more destructive behavior because he's an addict or she's an addict. So I can't just give, very good, thank you. Thank you. Very good. Our friend from Pakistan writes, most likely they'll get more drugs. Yes. And that's the reason I can't just give you the money. Why? Not because I don't believe that you have tremendous potential, but because in practicality, this money is going to go to waste. This energy that you're going to give Eisav, he simply doesn't have the mechanism to integrate it into his system. Or, conversely, the opposite will happen. He will just become overwhelmed completely. There won't be Eisav left. He'll become like a spiritual zombie, if I could say that. His metzius would be in his battle from the tremendous oil. It won't be integrated. In order to integrate it, it has to go to Yaakov. And through Yaakov, Eisav will ultimately be sublimated. And this is now Yaakov's tremendous duty and responsibility. Which now brings us to the next step. Hey, now comes the big question. What is this great light that allows the sparks of Asaf to emerge, to be elevated, to be sublimated? What is this great light? It says that Yitzchak knew that there are sparks and he wants to help Asaf access them, and therefore he confers upon him these extraordinary blessings. But ultimately it has to go through Yaakov. That's why it gets orchestrated in a different way, and Rivka is the one who understands that. What are these lights that can help Asaf find himself, his true self? This will be understood based on what the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, explains in Torah in this Maamar that we're speaking about, and in other Drushim and other Chassidic discourses, that klipos means shells, husks, which is basically the word that's used to describe all the forces in the world that conceal the true essence of divinity in the world. So they are associated very often with number 11. Kedusha misper eser, eser v'lo tesha, eser v'lo yachad aser, masheka b'sitra achra yesh yud aleph kisrin the mesavus. In Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, this is a known concept. Holiness is very much associated with the number of 10. There's an expression in Sefer Yetzirah, Perek Aleph, the first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah, as he points out in footnote 16, that there is 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. Sitra Achara means the other side. The other side means the side, people or things that are antithetical to holiness. So the Kabbalah describes them as having 11 crowns of impurity. Misa'avusa in Aramaic is Tuma. There are 11 crowns of impurity, not 10, but 11. This is the reason that in the daily incense that was burnt in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash in the morning and in the afternoon, known as Ketores, and we speak about it every morning, there were various herbs that were harvested and grounded into powder. This is known as the Ketores, and it had a particular measurement, how much they used to take from each one of these herbs, and then they would mix them together. And you had 11 types of samamonim, 11 types of herbs. And each morning in the Beis HaMikdash, there was a special avodah known as the avodah of the Ketores, of burning this incense, placing hot coals from the altar onto the incense, generating a major aroma. How many herbs were used every day? This potion, this mixture, this compound had 11 herbs. And we say them every day, right? Ve'eluhein, we say Hatsari, V'Hatzipayren, Hachalbana, V'Halavaina. We go through all of them. And the weight of how much was used, Moir, Ktsiya, Shiboilis Nerd, Charkaim, Koisht, Kilufa, Kinamoin, cinnamon. Kinamoin is cinnamon. The last one. 11 herbs. Why 11? The answer is, because the purpose of the Ketores was to refine, to elevate the 11 crowns of impurity. Not 10, 11. Why this difference? What's the meaning of this? Holiness is associated with 10, unholiness with 11. Why does unholiness come with 11? Who? Because we count also the divine energy that gives life to the klipa. The Kedusha, when it comes to holiness, the vitality of the 10 spheres. The 10 spheres represent the 10 divine characteristics with which Hashem creates and sustains and relates to the universes. So by holiness, the divine energy of known as the 10 spheres, the 10 divine characteristics. And the same is true with every item of holiness, which is always associated with number 10. As the Reb Moshe Ker de Vero, the Ramak, explains in his classic, in the Pardes, as he says in footnote 18, portal 2 of the Pardes, that everything in Kedusha is always associated with 10. We also see Chazal say that you don't say a davar shebekdusha, pachas me eser, you need the minyan, the 10, in order to say Baruch Hu, to say Kedusha, to say Kaddish. Because Kedusha is associated with 10. So the vitality of the Kedusha, nimshach b'pnimiyusam u'musachad imam v'lachein ein nimna b'fnei atzmai. The energy is integrated internally within the characteristics of each sphera and becomes one with them, and therefore it's not counted independently. So there's no number 11. Mashen can be when it comes to unholiness. They also have divine energy. But but the energy that gives them life and vivifies them remains aloof. Because if the energy of the divine would be integrated in Klippa in an organized and structured way, it would ultimately be swallowed up by them and dissolve, and it wouldn't be able to give them chiyus. Why? You understand what he's saying? This is very deep. And that's why in Klippa there's number 11 outside of number 10. This is very, very powerful idea. What's the difference of Kedusha and Klippa? I want you to understand this well. Kedusha is 10, Klippa is 11. Why? So the Rebbe explains. What's the difference? Kedusha means holiness. Klippa means a shell, a husk. A shell and a husk, it clips that which is inside of it, right? A banana peel protects the banana. It also conceals the banana, just as an orange peel and just like a walnut. And you have to break the shell in order to access the walnut. Anything that eclipses the true reality of what it really is, of Ein Oid Milvadei, that it's really a derivative of divine consciousness, that's called Klippa. Kedusha is transparency. Klippa is cover-ups. Anything that its existence is based on a cover-up, that's called Klippa. In other words, to put it bluntly, anything that if you would remove all the cover-ups, it would not exist, that's called Klippa. The reason it exists is because there's a cover-up. Now, in a very practical sense, what does this mean? This means when I am in a mode, let's say my thoughts are taking me into a place that tells me that I'm detached from God, that I'm a loser, that I'm hopeless, that I'm a Nebuch case, that I'm a shmata, that I'm unsalvageable, that I'm damaged goods. Those thoughts you can define as real Klippa thoughts. Why? What's the message of those thoughts? The message of those is you're detached from Hashem. In other words, they cover up the truth. What's the truth? The truth is that Ein Oid Milvadei, you're always one with God, because God is everywhere and everything. Like we say in davening, Va'ata mechaya es kulam. You give life to everything. Your presence is in everybody and in everything, and it vibrates through every single one of your 70 trillion cells, and through each of your 100 billion neurons, and in each molecule, and in every gene. It's full of divine sacred energy, and you're a manifestation of divine infinity and divine love and divine compassion. That's the truth. And when you're feeling that, that's Kedusha. That is holiness. Any thought, any word, any action that mirrors this truth about you and the world, that you are a manifestation of divine love and infinity, that's Kedusha. Transparency. Any thought, emotion, instinct, word or action that belies that truth, that eclipses that truth, and basically makes you feel that you're detached, you're separated, you're not part of infinity, that's Klippa. There's a cover-up. It's also called Sitra Achra. What allows Klippa to exist? What allows Klippa to exist is that it's not consciously aware of the divine energy that makes it be. Because if it was consciously aware that its very existence is a manifestation of divine energy, could it be Klippa? It can't be Klippa. To cover up the truth has to allow itself to be covered up. You can't cover up the truth if the truth is exposed. So what's the difference between Kedusha and Klippa? In Kedusha, everything gets chiyus from Hashem. Everything comes from the Eisav. Everything gets life from Hashem. But in Kedusha, the life is integrated into the reality that is receiving the life. There's a conscious relationship. The flow is seamless. In Klippa, the life also flows, but it remains segregated. It remains more aloof. It's not integrated into the consciousness of Klippa. That's why Klippa could function in the imagination that it's completely detached from God. If the divine energy in Klippa would be integrated in the Klippa, one of two things would happen. Either it would cease to be Klippa, it would become Kedusha, or on the other hand, if it wouldn't cease to be Klippa, it would abduct the holiness, it would abduct the energy, and swallow it up as well. The Koshnetz Magid, the Haley Koshnetz Magid, Avodas Yisrael, in the beginning of Parshas Miketz, explains at length the dream of Parah, those two dreams of Parah, amazing. Parah has the seven, you remember? Parah dreams of the 7 fat cows emerging from the Nile Delta. They're satiated, they're robust, they're well fed. And then there are the 7 lean cows, emaciated skeletons that emerge from the river. And then what happens? The lean cows swallow up the fat cows to the point you don't even see a trace of the fat cows and the lean cows. And then the same dream is repeated with the stalks of grain. You have the robust stalks of grain, you have the emaciated stalks of grain, and the emaciated ones swallow up the other ones, and Yosef explains the meaning of it, referring to the 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. You all know the story. We're going to learn it in a few weeks. Be'ez Rasha. So the Helike Kazhnitz Amagid, Yisrael of Kazhnitz, the Avodas Yisrael, explains, and the truth is in Torah Erev Mikate, there's also a Maamar from the Alter Rebbe, at the end he refers to this. He says, this is a definition of how Paroi dreams about reality. Everything is filled with divine energy. Everything is filled. What makes klippa is v'loy noida ki bo el kirbena. The energy is there, but you don't see it. It gets swallowed up. And if it gets swallowed up, how does Kedusha give vitality to klippa? Klippa would stop existing. So that's why there always has to be a divine energy in klippa that remains higher. It remains infinite. It remains above the keli. It's not fully internalized and integrated, because only then can the klippa continue to get nurture from the Kedusha without becoming obliterated, and also without it squandering and swallowing up the chiyus to the point that it's not recognizable anymore. That's why by klippa there's always a number 11. The number 11 represents the energy that remains what's called makif, above, higher. In Kedusha, you don't need number 11. Why? Because Kedusha, the vessel, is transparent. It's open to the divine flow. Because it's open to the divine flow, so divine energy is fully integrated in the 10. The structure of life is 10. Hashem identified within his infinity 10 kaiches, 10 spheres, 10 characteristics. That's the structure of life. And through those, Hashem creates and sustains and relates to the universe. Every human soul is comprised of 10 building blocks. The world is made up of 10 building blocks, 10 lights. They're called 10 spheres. But there's a difference between the 10 of Kedusha and the 10 of Klippa. The 10 of Kedusha, the divine energy is fully integrated in the 10. So there's 10, there's no 9, there's no 11. But in Klippa, the divine energy can't be fully integrated within the 10, because then it wouldn't be Klippa. So there's 10, but there's always number 11. Number 11 is that which remains transcendent. So it could give its energy to the klippa without the klippa being conscious of it, because this level of energy is related to it through the superconscious. Because if klippa would relate to it consciously, it would not be klippa anymore. If klippa screams, Einoid Melvadai, there's no klippa, it's Kedusha. For klippa to be klippa and yet live, so you have a paradox. You're living from God, and yet you think that you're detached from God. But in reality, your very ability to think that you're detached is coming from your relationship with God. So how does that happen? You get it? Even your sense of separateness is being fueled from God. So that happens through number 11. Because number 11 relates to you, but it doesn't relate to you in a way that you're consciously aware of what you're receiving, because this energy remains transcendent, and that's why in Klippa there's always number 11, and in Kedusha there's no number 11. In Kedusha there's number 10. This is deep, and it's very real. It's deep and real. But now let's understand something. This means, and this is really where it gets intense, that Eisav has something over Yaakov. Klippa has something over Kedusha, because it has number 11. In Kedusha, the divine energy is always structured. It's integrated. In Klippa, the energy can't be integrated. It remains above. So there's a certain infinity in the divine energy of Klippa that Kedusha doesn't have. The relationship of Klippa to it is only through the subconscious or through the superconscious, because it's above, it's higher. But it's something very, very intense, something very powerful, something very special. In other words, the fact that it's not integrated means that it's not structured, it's not condensed, it's not restricted. Therefore, it allows for the chaos of Klippa because it remains somewhat higher. But that itself means that there's something very, very divine about it that is never filtered. So here we come to the next step. Sitra Acher, the other side, Kedusha, is always the counterbalance of holiness. The Zeshe Belumazah Yesh B'china Hayiralav Shemuvdelis Meha Yesh Gam B'Kedusha L'umazah Sheyeshna Madrege Shelamayla Me'eser Sfiris Muvdelis Meha Ela Sheb'Kedusha B'china Zu Eina Hachiyus Shel Eser Sfiris. The Achiyus Shel Eser Sfiris Mislabish B'Toichem U'Misached Imam Kanal B'chinas Hamakev Shelamayla Me'eser Sfiris Zu Inyan La'atzma V'Lachein Eina Nimnis Imam Antu Chad V'La B'Chushbin Mashenke B'Sitra Achere Sheb'chinas Hamakev Hu Achiyus Shelahem Tzarich Lichlol Gamas Hamakev B'Misparim Ki B'li Hamakev Ein Lem Chiyus L'chein Ein B'Mispar Yiralef. Here we go to the next step. If in Klippa you have 11, in Kedusha you also have 11, because everything is Zela Umazah. So just like you say in Klippa you have number 11, which is separated from the 10, it's aloof, it's higher, it's transcendent, and that's what gives the Chiyus Klippa. In Kedusha you also have that which is above the 10. There's 10 spheres, and then there's number 11. In Zohar it says, Antu Chad V'La B'Chushbin. You, Hashem, are one, and you're not part of the calculation of 10. That's the number 11, which is the pure infinite light that transcends the 10. So why don't we count 11 in holiness? Because by Klippa, the 11 is what gives chiyus to the 10, because it can't be integrated. So we count the 11. By holiness, this number 11 is not the vitality of the 10 spheres, because the vitality of the 10 spheres is completely one with them. It's part of the 10. This mak of this number 11 is completely aloof and it's separate. It's beyond the 10 spheres. By Klippa, number 11 is what vivifies the 10. Because without it wouldn't have chiyus. Without the makif is this higher transcendent light, the Klippa wouldn't have chiyus. So therefore they're counted as 11. Holiness is counted as 10 because the energy of the divine is completely one and integrated with the 10. But there is the concept of number 11. We don't call it number 11, we call it Antu Chad V'La B'Chushbin. That oneness, it's completely beyond the 10. Al Pizem Movin. From this we understand Shahabinir Dir Aleph Kisim Besavusa Adam Shachas Hamakev Shalamayla Masses Fidus She'enay Nimne Imam B'chinas Atik Dugmas B'chinas Hayir Aleph Shebesitrach Reshem Uvdelas Ma'am Kanal. If so, the only way you can elevate the 11 crowns of impurity is you cannot do it through the 10 spheres of Kedusha. You have to find the number 11 of holiness. You have to find that which transcends the 10 spheres. In Kabbalah, that's called Atik. You have the 10 spheres, Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. You have what's called Atik. Atik is also known as Pnimius HaKeser, the crown above the head. That parallels number 11 in Klippa. Number 11 in Klippa is above Klippa. Number 11 in Kedusha is completely above Kedusha, above the 10 spheres. The difference is by Klippa, number 11 is what gives chiyus to the Klippa, because without it wouldn't live. By Kedusha, it gets chiyus from the 10 divine energies. Number 11 is completely a separate thing. But if you want to access the Kedusha of Eisav, number 11, you're not going to get it through the 10 spheres. You have to tune in to the makif that's higher than the 10 spheres. Now this needs a lot of explanation. What does this mean, and how do we bring this down to our lives? We have here an extraordinary blueprint of how Yaakov can elevate Asaf. and how we elevate the Eisav in ourselves, and how we elevate the Eisav that may exist in other people. If I'm going to try to inspire Eisav through my own structured holiness, I'm never going to reach Eisav. The only way I can reach Eisav is if I'm ready to transcend my structured holiness and go to my own number 11. I have to go out completely of my spiritual comfort zone and go to my own number 11. And then I can find and accentuate Asaf's number 11, the 11th herb of the incense, and help him become cognizant of his own makif, of his own divine makif. As long as I remain within the confinements of my 10, which is amazing, that's the divine energy that's integrated into my system, but it's also filtered and condensed, I'll never be able to touch Asaf's holiness. Because Asaf's holiness is completely beyond structure. And I want to force Asaf to come into my structure and show him how beautiful it is. But that's not his godliness. His godliness is infinite. The tragedy is there's no consciousness of his godliness. So it's only when I'm ready. It's only when I'm ready to go out of my spiritual comfort zone. Only when I'm ready to say goodbye to my 10 spheres and go to Atik, to Antu Chad V'la B'chushban. Only when you have a relationship with Hashem that is completely beyond your structures, even your holy structures. Only when you're ready to strip yourself from everything that you call spiritual and holy and divine, and you ask not what God can do for you, but what you can do for God. And you ask not how Asaf can fit into your life, but you ask how you can transcend yourself and tune into the ultimate truth beyond your existence, that then Asaf can sense that light, because that's the light that he really has in a super conscious way. And that's how you can heal Asaf. And in that process of healing Asaf, you heal yourself, because you find a much deeper part of yourself that you would have never known about, which is number 11, Antu Chad V'la B'chushban. When you find number 11 in Kedusha, that number 11 attracts the number 11 in Klippa. That's the language, that's the frequency the Klippa can relate to. Those are the sparks in Eisav that are very, very deep. So it's our relationship with Eisav that allows us to find number 11 in ourselves. And as we'll see in the next year, that this is unbelievably intimated in the words of Rivka, the way she speaks to Yaakov about taking the blessings. She puts in 2 words that her husband never said. Lifnei Hashem, as we'll see in the next class, which basically is teaching her son what he has to do if he wants to take the blessings, which will ultimately sublimate Asaf, which is going to heal the world. Somebody writes here, I have to listen to this again. I think it's too deep for my finite morning brain. So maybe you have to listen to it when your infinite evening brain emerges into the universe. What does transcending your 10 spheres look like in real life? Can you give an example? Yeah, I'm going to give more than one example, but not in this class, but Ezra Hashem in the next class, Monday morning, because this needs, this is the idea. We just learned the idea. As always, you can't understand Chassidus if you don't apply it emotionally, and you don't apply it psychologically, practically to your life. You can't understand it. It's just, transcendent ideas. Some intellectual people may enjoy it, but you don't get it. Without experience, you don't get it. So we need not only one example, we need many examples. But Be'ezer Hashem, we're going to work this through and answer the questions that are coming in. Doesn't it say that Yitzchak was fooled by Eisav and so forth? We'll address it all Be'ezer Hashem in the next class. In the meantime, I'm going to wish you all a beautiful day. Stay tuned. Today, 2 o'clock, we have a lecture with the South African Jewish community. It's on Zoom. It's also on the yeshiva.net. And the topic is, Can I Change Me? That's 2 o'clock today, New York time. Monday morning, 7:30, we're going to continue our discussion here. Number 10, number 11. Please try to review so we can go to the next level and bring the 10 and fuse it with the 11 Be'ezer Hashem. Oh, that was amazing. You're holding a shofar. I was giving the Tuesday class to the women, which, by the way, it's kedai to listen to. Why did the Christians choose a Jewish child as their deity? It was Yitzchak's blessing to Asaf. And I was speaking about a shofar in the tent. And suddenly, from out of the tent, somebody was blowing shofar. It was like a revelation from heaven. It was pretty intense. Okay, Chavre, God bless.